This is going to be a series of videos on what I'm going to call a no high grade buildup of a car. So the car in question is the Copperfang Black Special, and it is a popular car. Let's just say it's a cool looking snake machine. Doesn't look as good in videos as it does in real life. It's one of those things that reminds you of the fun of the basic mini four-wheel drive car before you go down into crazy land. So this car, what I would like to do is to build it up using no high-grade parts. Now what I mean by that is there are different lines of parts that Tamiya has. Oops. So over here, these are all these ones you see that say four-wheel drive mini racer. Now, there are lots of parts that fit into this line. Some carbon things there, your basic setting stuff, old-timey stabilizer pegs. All this stuff is basic racer, but then you also have parts. Let's see if I can find something here. Absolutely know for sure. I have some high-grade parts here. I haven't used them all up yet. Let's see. Ah, okay. Here's another type of part, the AO part. And then, this is not a high-grade part. Interesting. I thought that would be. But still, I have some bearings in here. Here we are. Here's an example of high-grade. And let's see. Here's another example. So these parts are HG. And usually HG means that, well, let's start with the basics. Racer parts are aftermarket, or, they're additional parts you can buy for your car. They'll make it faster. Sometimes you get a racer part in the car kit for free, but usually you don't get any racer parts. Then there are these AO parts. Now the AO parts are supposed to be replacements. I believe they're supposed to be replacements of things that originally were part of another thing. So for example, if I have any, these are not good examples. Green AO parts. So like for example, bearings that were part of something that needed bearings would have an AO part version where you would just buy the bearing. Here's some more high-grade parts. Then there's the high-grade parts. High-grade parts are almost always turned aluminum or carbon fiber. And high-grade meaning that, well, there are plastic rollers and there are steel rollers. And there are FRP bumpers, aluminum bumpers, and even plastic bumpers. These are extra high grade. You don't necessarily need stuff that good. What we're going to do with this car, now bearings, you do bearings are bearings. If they don't make high grade, are there non-high grade bearings? I think there are. The hex hole bearings, maybe? I don't know. But we're just going to try for the first time. We're going to build this car up using only racer parts and maybe AO parts. Probably just racer parts. No high grades. So where do we start? Well, this car is a solid base. The FMA is a smooth running machine. I like it a lot. You don't have to worry about all the tiny little tweaks and shoring up tolerances and everything just to get it to go fast as the motor will take it. It goes as fast as the motor will take it almost out of the box. And it's very easy to work on. Speaking of motors, like, hey, the motor just comes right out. No tools for that. I like it when something comes out the bottom, like the batteries or the motor. When you have to take the battery off to do literally everything, it can be frustrating. Boy, am I having trouble with this. Okay, so in goes the motor. Our first parts getting all this junk out of the way. Our first parts will be the FRP plate for Super X chassis, one of those. FRP rear brake stay, and the basic tune-up part sets for VZ, which includes these two FRP bumpers and all these knickknacks, mass stampers. So after this, we'll still be running the stock motor. We will have all the brake we want, which we shouldn't need any because the car is too slow to need any, but it'll be there ready to go. This piece will go underneath and help us fall back down into the course better, hopefully. It's going to go like here and just sort of help the car fall back down the fence. We're going to continue to reuse the green rollers because they look cool and they're not really any worse than these. So we're going to start with a stacked plate system, sort of like what I have going on here. Only it'll have slightly different parts. And you will continue to see the cool look of the green. We're not going to break that up. We'll need 2 more rollers. I'll get some black ones from somewhere. Figure out exactly how the rear is going to work. And then we're going to run the car. Now this car, I have a time on this. It's 19 seconds or something like that. I have it somewhere. And we're going to put all this stuff on it and see if we can get to not lose speed. What I mean by that is it's going to weigh more just by having nothing to help it go faster. Will we lose speed? I think we'll be a little faster. And the reason why is this. So how will its speed be affected? Here's a mini 4-wheel drive car, stock, sitting in the track. And as you can see, there's room for this thing as it's going on its way. It does this kind of thing constantly. Not at that resolution, of course. It's probably only bouncing, every few feet. But regardless, it's not really going in a straight line. It's going in a very slow zigzag. But if you think about it, if you make your car wider, this car can't move as far. It can only move 18 millimeters or so. This one, I don't know, a lot more. So, and by the way, there is a legal maximum. This thing right here represents the widest you're allowed to make the car. And you can see, it's allowed to be pretty dang wide, almost filling the track. So that's what we're gonna do. If we use normal max width stays like this Toyota has, and we use 13 millimeter rollers in the correct hole, these same ones, we'll have the same stance as this. We also know that you pretty much need to have double rollers in the back or something like that. Otherwise, you'll never pass the lane changer. So we're going to double the rollers and widen them out and add a brake, but put no tape on it so that it won't work. And then we're going to time it again. Okay, so this car was built as it should be built in the manual. Nothing special to it at all. What we're going to do is remove the rollers. We're going to remove the rear bumper because it's optional on an FMA. Okay, here we are, bumperless. My, how chubby this thing looks with these massively fat tires on it and no rear bumper. So the rear bumper we'll get to in a minute. Let's take a look at the difference in width. Now those 2 holes are where the 13 millimeter rollers go in stock. And when we put this on here, we're going to be able to put those rollers, I'll have to figure out which hole it is exactly, but it's going to be, actually it's probably in instructions. Yeah. So anyway, it goes in, or whatever. It's going to go in one of these holes, which means a couple things. This is where the stock one was, and this is where it's going to go. First of all, we're going to have it wider. It's going to be closer to the wall, which is going to make it wander less. Secondly, notice it's also closer to the tire. And we also want that because that means the control is directly at the part of the car. Because turning the car essentially involves shoving the front axles left and right as the walls change. So the faster response comes, you know, those accurate response comes when the wheel's as close to the tire as possible. On the rear, we actually want the opposite of that. On the rear, you want to drag out, you want those rollers as far back as you possibly can and still be legal, with the maximum length being 165 millimeters. Same reason why you want a longer arrow is more balanced. It's like balancing an arrow or a rocket ship. You want weight in the front and drag in the back, and that way the back will always be in the back and the front won't move very much because it's got weight to keep it stable. That's how you balance a rocket or arrow. So in this case, when we go to put the rear bumper on, and exactly how we do that, I'm not sure how that's going to work, some sort of a stack up, we will not do anything necessarily to go out of our way to bring the rollers closer to the front wheels. They're going to end up, you know, you can see where they're going to end up, and that's okay. Longer cars are kind of better. Another thing we gain, this is something only recently has Tamiya sort of acknowledged the usefulness of this trick. By what they've done is, with the VZ tune-up parts, they do not give you a front bumper and a rear bumper. They give you basically two front bumpers, or two rear bumpers, because we've now learned that a great trick for using front bumpers on the front of the car, see how you can mount it here, and then somewhere else if you want. Someone's figured out you can adjust the down thrust angle pretty easily by putting washers under these two, and that essentially angles the plate this way, which is going to push down on the car, front of the car more. That's the kind of trick we might need, considering we don't have access to good rollers. We're only going to be using kit rollers or other non-HG rollers. Other differences, things that are going to change. We are going to be using this kind of hardware where there's a brass collar and a lock nut and all that stuff, whatever, stabilizers, to hold the rollers in. It will not be a screw going directly into the chassis. That's going to make this way more reliable. If you race this car for hours and hours, something's going to break. Usually the screw gets bent enough so that there's no down thrust angle, and then it gets bent even more and breaks off. With a screw going through FRP with a brass collar, you're very unlikely to see that. Although there will be much more drag than an HG roller. Okay, here we have the front bumper and roller and stabilizer all set up. Now, it just so happens, put this on here. Just so happens that I have a lot of parts laying around in bins. So that when I decide to do something like this, I can just do it. I don't have to order anything. And I happen to have stabilizer ball caps in the exact color, or very near the exact color as everything else. So this looks just like it came out of the box. It's all still color coordinated. There's just a little bit of fiberglass here where, a little bit of brass. I had to mount the rollers up, not the rollers, but the brass collar, these things. Normally a base kit comes with this for your roller screw, and this collar is what the plastic roller rides on, and this would be screwed into the chassis. When you're mounting it like this, you're putting a screw through the plate. So on the screw rides this collar. That's what's greased, that's what it's on. Had issues with the shape of this kind of roller and the extra large washers that I want to use and all that. So I ended up mounting the collars upside down, but they spin nice. And now we can move on to the back. I wanted to say something though as to why I'm doing a no HG build. I believe that although mini four-wheel drive is, somewhat known in the United States, it's not a mainstream hobby, and really it kind of needs to be a mainstream hobby in order to exist, which is why in the Japanese markets and all over Asia, you have things that are not Japan Cup grade that people are very interested in, lower level racing. And we can look in the parts catalog here to show you the kind of things I'm talking about. We use the we use the VZ starter set, but the once upon, they made one for, that one's just called First Try. All of these pretty much work with anything. They come with slightly different parts. The stabilizer ball caps that I use, those are common parts. None of this is high grade. Plastic rollers and large stabilizer caps. All of these parts, these cool things, plastic double rollers, rarely seen in the United States. And the reason for that is because it's so expensive to get this stuff over here that why would you spend $10 shipping a $2 roller? Why not just spend $10 shipping a $6 roller and then spend a little more money but have something 8 times as good? So it tends to be, there's no 6-year-olds doing this in America. There's no poor kids. It's not really an entry grade to RC. In the Los Angeles community, it's for kids who can afford expensive RCs because they're spending hundreds on a stupid slot car. It's so dumb. But therefore, there's almost no good advice in English language on YouTube or anywhere else about like how to use plastic rollers with maximum efficiency or whatever, because no one ever talks about it. If it's in English, they probably skipped all the way past it. But I would have to say I do enjoy the large variety and styles around the world in many 4-wheel drive stuff. For example, Indonesia, they're very fast. Japan, they're jumping around a lot. In China, everything's pirate. In America, everything's expensive. It's cool that there's that much variety. So yeah, let's get on to the rear now. That's going to be a little more complicated. The added thickness of the FRP plate did make the body not want to fit very well. So I clipped the headlights with nippers, and it cut right through the sticker in the body and everything. It's like perfect. So while we're talking about the technical aspects of this no HG build, let's look at how much money you actually save. And this will greatly depend on how you buy your stuff and where you buy it and stuff like that. But price of the car, 1,200 yen. FRP rear brake stay set. We're going to be using that. Great deal. Use it on almost every car. Sometimes the carbon one, usually I like to have cars where the stuff on the lower end that gets smashed to bits is the FRP. And I put the carbon fiber where the strength is needed and where I don't care if it gets effed up or it won't be effed up. Anyway, so yeah, then we also include the basic tune-up parts for VZ, which gives us both of our bumpers, all of our mass dampers, all the rollers, and caps and spacers. Now we're using our own rollers, but either way, you get rollers. And we had our own caps. Caps, custom colored, 200 yen for an assorted set. They come in different hues. This is like bright, I guess, but there's one I have that's like mostly neon, sort of Easter colors. That's where those came from. And then this FRP plate. Altogether, 2,800 yen. If you're buying it at a discount, 2,200 yen. Like seriously, not very much money. Of course, shipping, of course, the realities of shipping. But let's just compare that to, I said, what, 2,800 yen? Let's compare, let's say we're building a Japan Cup car, and your design calls for one of these elite 3mm thick bumpers at 1,200 yen just for a bumper. And then you need, let's say you needed another one, 940. Let's say you somehow were able to build a car that only had 2 carbon fiber bumper pieces. You're at over 2,000 yen. Add bearings, but you're over budget. No car yet, right? This thing will be ready to accept at least a torque tuned 2, if not a light dash. Let's look at the motor scale. Let's see what our goals should realistically be. There we go. So how fast can we go? Well, I have no doubt we'll be able to handle all the tuned cars, tuned types. Light dash, probably. I'm pretty sure we'll be able to handle light dash. Hyper dash, I don't know if we'll have the brake for it. but we for sure can get to light dash, and that car will be pretty quick. Right now we're doing about a 19-second lap. If we were to put a light dash in with these parts, we should easily be able to get it down to 17. I'm pretty sure. We'll see. We'll see how it turns out. This is sort of scientific. But anyway, my point is, the shipping is so expensive. These things, they don't cost a lot to ship, but when you buy them one at a time on eBay and you mail them one at a time, they've already been mailed one at a time from Japan or the Philippines to where you're buying it from. It just adds up. But if you can get them for as cheap as possible, ship them all at once, etc., to the point where the actual cost of the item is more important than the cost of the shipping, then going with no HGs could potentially quarter the cost of your build. It really could. So let's see how good of a car you get out of it. Okay, this is my harebrained scheme. Roughed up. This is not finished, but what we ended up doing here is the FRP brake plate is what is attached to the chassis. The Super X FRP plate is below that, and that is our underguard. That will help it go back into the fence nicely. Thus illustrated. If this wasn't here, when this thing jumps and it comes down, it's good to have this piece below the roller. The roller would get snagged big time, but because this is here, it really will help it a lot. The rollers ended up like this. I took black ones out of my collection. They're exactly the same as these. They're just a different color, so they don't add to the budget. I put the wide FMA style roller on top. They're almost weightless. It's not going to affect center of gravity or anything. I'm not going to add the mass dampers because we're not going to be going fast enough to need them. So this will be an experiment just in what speed effect is there by widening the car. Now, there will be a little more drag because there's two rollers back here. And there will be a little more weight because there's a bunch more screws and stuff. But I think we're going to break even or maybe get a little bit ahead. I'm not going to race it just yet, though. Like I said, this is roughed up, so strictly speaking, this is really bad. These are going to scrape into the ground. And these stick up too high. Many four-wheel drive rules basically say you can't have exposed screw heads because when the cars wipe out, they scratch the kids. But also they F up the track, and you already have enough problems with, like, people not wearing their gym shoes on the gym floor. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this all apart now that I've discovered, I've basically figured out what I wanted. I'm going to take it all apart. I'm going to countersink some of these screws possibly. If I do, I'll add screws to the budget. And then I'm going to make sure nothing is too pokey here. Now these are actually going to probably, there's a good chance this will be the location of mass dampers eventually when we need them. So these screws are overly long, but they're going to be overly long eventually anyway. So anyway, yeah, car's looking really good. I need to get it, I'm not going to put a brake on it, but I got to do something about these screws because I can't have it scratching things when it goes over hills. We know that the roller screw won't scratch because it's above our underguard. So yeah, I like this a lot. This is good. It's still in the spirit, the original spirit of the car. So that's what I want to do. I want to make it cooler on a low budget without ruining the overall vibe. Some comments on screws. What we're going to do with this car is we're going to, at this point, now that we have the basic idea how we want the settings up, we're going to refine it a bit. So there's a couple things we're going to do there. In the front, we are going to countersink all these screws so that they will no longer be sticking up like that. Well, he doesn't have any, but anyway, we'll see what that looks like when we do it. 4 screws there to countersink. It will make them slightly stronger because the screw will actually contact more plastic, and also the screws are better, and then also it will be also flush, so anything that we add to this won't conflict. In the rear, we've got like this. We don't want these screws sticking out. We want them to be as flush as possible. That way the brake foam is the only thing that we have to worry about contacting. So about screws, there's basically 3 kinds of screws in this hobby. You have your, well, there's 4 kinds, I guess. There's probably even 10, who knows, but basically 4 that you encounter. This type is the type that you see coming with the first tri-part set. And this is the type of screw you get to mount all sorts of things. It has this basic head. It's nothing special. They come in all sizes. And there's another one. And there's a much shorter one. Well, shinier, but still, same thing. Now, the other type of screw is the countersunk screw. Like this one. See how we have a 45-degree angle on the head. And we also have a 45-degree angle on the tool. No coincidence. And the other type of screw that you see, oh, well, 2 more types of screws. The pan head. So that's one where the top is a little larger and rounded. These are what they give you to attach bumpers usually on cars that don't have built-in bumpers. And those come in different sizes as well. And then the other type you see is the strongest, socket-headed. This is if you want to have like a big tall roller like this, and you don't want to block it in with, you don't want to box it in with any other stuff. You just, so you want the strongest screw you can get. That's that one. These are the most expensive, and you also need an Allen key that they come with to use them. So we are going to add to the set, add to the total cost of this package, 280 yen for an assortment of screws, mostly the 6s. And so I don't know what this is set. Yeah, there's another set that is different selection of lengths. And for some reason I can't find any cards from that, but I've bought a bunch of these. So 280 yen will now go on, and we will tighten this up, make it a little more perfect, a little smoother. This is our opportunity to use a little elbow grease instead of just buying better parts, because we're going to skip the good parts. So this would be an example of, these are the screws we're going to use. These are the screws we are replacing. And also it'd be a good time to mention, if you don't have one of these, get one. In fact, maybe 2, because there's a lot of different components. It's so handy to have these. And I know you're thinking like, oh, they're just pill separators, or, you know, pill boxes. Well, they're kind of like pill boxes, but they're actually slightly better. There's an extra day in the week, and they're smaller, and they're rounded in a very perfect way. If these were pill boxes, they'd actually be a little too small. You wouldn't be able to fit very many pills in there. For an entire day, a lot of people take more pills than that in a day. But they're really good for these tiny little pieces. They're just about perfect. Also, the case itself has none of those, no bendy plastic hinges. They're all real plastic swinging hitches. So they're pretty nice. They come in different designs. Those are the only 2 I have. Apparently when fully cowled hit 20 years, and when the series overall hit 35 years. So that would have been 2017 and 2014, I think, something like that. Anyway, stay organized. You're going to get completely lost in this hobby. And the other nice thing about this type of thing is you can literally pick it out of here with one hand and go, okay, I need pan head screws. flip it open with your thumb. Pour the whole thing into your hand if you want, and then pour it all back in, because you can only lose what you've opened, which makes it super convenient. You can't lose anything unless you've opened it. This shows you the, I have these two screws upgraded, and these two not. So this is perfectly smooth, more or less. And these are a little bumpy. Okay, so cleanup is complete. In the front, we've got this completely smooth area now, and there's a reason for that. I'll get back to it in a minute. In the rear, on the bottom, we've countersunk this, so it's now totally smooth on the bottom. These are rough, but these absolutely cannot hit the track because they're too close to the wheel. These can. These screws, the roller screws hit, and as you can see, let's see if I can do, yeah, see, scratches. So in order to keep it from doing that every single time it goes around the track, I'm going to add the tiniest amount of brake that I can, just to make sure that it hits the brake and not the screws. The alternative is I could raise the rear rollers a little. Maybe I'll do that. Put one more space. I don't want to use any spacers though, because that's bill of parts. If I put slightly longer spacers in there, it'll raise the stay up. Do I have any? Oh, wait, is that one? There's one. Do I have another one? I'm trying to see what I still have from all the parts that came with all of these sets that we're using. I do not, is that it? Ah, that's okay. So that is about the thickness of the head of the screw. As you can see, if I put that spacer in there, it will move this up and that won't grind. So I think that's probably what I'll do. Other changes I've made, slightly change the rollers. But anyway, we have a nice green ball at the top. Nice balls protecting these screw ends from trashing the track. Right now, I'm really happy with this thing. I mean, I don't know how fast it is. I'm going to readjust the rear, and that way we can skip the foam completely. It'll just scrape on the bottom when it goes around the track. And okay, after that modification, we'll get some timing. And well, yeah, I think we're about ready to go. One thing I've noticed is these rollers are quite wobbly compared to high-grade ones. I guess it's not as noticeable on these, but it's pretty much the same. It's just because these are square, it's more visible. Yeah, so there's we're well on our way to our budget Copperfang. First test of relevance. Let's see if we can do it. Okay, I think we finally have the rear bumper iteration that we want. So, as we talked about, the VZ bumpers, you get two rear bumpers. And I'm not really using the rear bumper the way you normally use a rear bumper. These holes aren't being used. And they were in conflict with these screws. And I didn't want to cut it because I thought this car might go through a lot of variations and we might want to maintain all the parts for all their functionality for budget reasons, being that this is a budget building sort of scenario we're in. So I raised it up on spacers to make room, and that allowed me to put this roller under the stay, which was great because that's low, very low. Problem is it's just too low. So when I went to raise it, I thought, why not put bigger spacers in there? And then I realized, never mind, how about put smaller spacers in there? Yeah, because now it barely clears the plate, but it does clear it completely. And therefore we lowered this plate a little bit. As a result of that, we're going to put the wheels on top of it now. The lower rollers are now on top of it. I mean, they've gone up a little bit, but not too much. And the result now, as you can see, is we do not hit the screws at all. and the underguard and the FRP brake plate both almost hit both of their edges at the same time, which is exactly what we want. That's what this guy does. That's exactly what we want. So that didn't cost us any parts. You may notice that I have this roller kind of low. There's a couple reasons for that. One is it was just easier to get it going there that way. Won't get into the details. Another one is looks cooler when they're lower. Makes the whole car look lower. And another one is these are the crappiest screws they make and they're the longest size, meaning these are definitely going to bend. So I figured if I put the roller lower, if it didn't need to be up here, then if I put it lower, it's a less leverage at this point, and maybe these won't get bent as fast. So we now have a car that falls down the fence very well. The wider you make it, the more important it becomes that it falls down the fence because you're closer to the fence all the time. So it has a nice shape to it. And yeah, it doesn't seem to get hung up, maybe in the front. We'll work on that maybe later. Doesn't have any real brake to speak of. It just kind of grinds on the edges of these plates. And now what we're going to do is put it on the track and see how much better than 19.3 or whatever it was that we got. How much better can we do just having made, essentially, just having made the rollers further out, slightly closer to the wheels in the front, slightly further away from the wheels in the back. An unintended brake characteristic we don't really want. It shouldn't come much into play. See what we get just from that. And that's what we're going to do right now. By the way, the Copperfang Black Special, and perhaps the original, I don't know, is one of the cars that has something you don't see a lot, stickers that go on the chassis. It's almost, it's not inconceivable, but it does very rarely happen. They're meant to continue the snake motif. I knew what I was going to do with this car, so I did not put those on the chassis because I knew they'd be covered up. Now that we know what the front stay situation is going to be, we think for a while, I've put them on there. And that is his full look. He will be heading to the track. Okay, the results are in. We've done another time trial with this car on its new wider stance, closer rollers to the wheel, longer rollers back. When running, the brake barely touches. I don't think it matters. It's incredibly minute, so it's about perfect in that regard. So the times, we don't have good news on that front, I'm afraid. I'm afraid the time is terrible. This car is, in fact, 1.75 seconds slower around the track with all the work we've done to it. Why? Well, just as I had theories for why it might go faster, I have theories that will now explain why it's actually going slower. Are any of these theories correct? I'm not sure. But I believe what slowed us down was a couple of things. There is more weight. Not a lot more weight, because keep in mind we took that piece off. And two of the screws, you know, were already in there. And these screws are per millimeter in length heavier than what we're using. So, but the weight has gone up. I think it's actually happened, the thing that hurt us the most, it was the very thing we were looking for. Because if the car is wider, we did that so that it would be contacting the wall more, right? Well, there's friction on the rollers, and actually on these rollers quite a bit. That means it now has more friction, quite a bit. We went from 19 something to 21 something. Pretty bad. So why in the world would anyone do this? Well, why would anyone do this? I think I've explained it to you. I wanted it to look cool. However, why would anyone widen the car if it only slows it down? The answer is it doesn't slow it down. It's an excellent example of one of those things that you find in racing, performance, motorsports, models, whatever, is that sometimes the key to victory is even more parasitic loss, even less efficiency. That's where the speed comes in. What I mean by that is the tires on like the aerodynamics on a Formula One car that produce 1,500 kilograms of downforce or something like that on the car. Clearly, it takes hundreds of horsepower just to push through the air to generate that. But if it gives you that much downforce that the car can go flying around Eau Rouge at max throttle, then it's worth the losses, right? Because you'd have to slow down there, you're going to get past. Well, what we have here is a car that has the losses already, but none of the things to justify it. And what I mean is when we get a more powerful motor in this thing, or even maybe just when we change the gear ratio, which is going to be our next step, we may see all of that pay itself off. Now, having done this experiment, it occurs to me more than ever that there is really a tremendous amount of balance to stock cars. Because if you think about it, the stock car and the stock motor, it clearly goes faster if it's narrower. So that's why they're always narrower and they have these smaller rollers. Now, it would be interesting to see if we put 19s on the stock chassis, which would give it the same maximum width as this. If we put 19mm high-grade rollers on there, would that be better than this? I'm going to say probably yes, a lot. Because these rollers have so much friction and they're just always contacting that, they're just dragging it. But if we were to put a more powerful motor in this car, it would almost not even... A torque tune would probably make this thing fly off my track. If not, a light dash certainly would. It would never stay on the track. It needs all of this to go with the motor. So when we put a light dash in here or a torque tune, this becomes very balanced and perfect again like this was. It's just faster. This is balanced because it's supposed to cost 12 bucks and be the same speed as all the other cars. This is balanced in anticipation of more power. Unfortunately, there's no way I'm going to go switching back and forth between stock configurations in this one. So we're just going to, our next step is going to be gear ratio. Okay, so our experiment is thus concluded. Go fast parts make your car slow, unless everything is done strategically with balance in mind. The crap roller setup on a stock car more or less suits its original weight and power and ratio and whatnot. This stuff is anticipation of at least a torque tune, and I don't have it, so it just drags it down. Not from necessarily the weight, but the friction of all this even more roller play than normal. More stable, but slower. Something we could do, I suppose, put some washers in there to reduce the down dust angle, but I don't think we want to do that because we're going to need this eventually. So coming up next, motors and gears. What I'm going to do, I think, is basically map out. I'm going to figure out if any of the gears are faster than what it comes with. Right now, it has a red. Which one's red? It says here red is 4.2 to 1. It's a fair amount of reduction. We don't think it's going to go any faster with a 5 to 1. Our course has hills, but it's not all hills. What I'm going to do, without bothering to film it, is I'm going to take a quick shot at these, trying to map how fast these go, get us a table, and then on the stock motor. And then what we're going to do is we'll bump up to the next motor. The stock motor, as you can see from this chart, normal motor. This chart is not as complicated as it looks because most of these motors are on here twice. Normal motor, pro. Two drive shafts. It's the only difference. Otherwise, they're exactly the same. So, Torque Tune 2 Pro and regular, same thing. Atomic Tune Pro, Rev Tune Pro, all the same. These represent the tuned class, and a lot of people racing classes that are based on these. You can have any of these motors, or you can just do torque tuned, which is the best. Hyper Dash is where you're normally at with like Japan Cup speeds. Light Dash is sort of in between. I'm confident we can do Light Dash with this car at some point. We can definitely do torque tune right now. I'm pretty sure of it. But we're going to take this step at a time, one step at a time. We're going to move to a few different gear ratios, a few different motors, and then I'll start another series on that and where the car goes from there. We've now gone through some gear testing. Attempting to map out the best times with our current setup, stock motor. The gear ratios are 3.5 to 1, 3.7 to 1. Those both need to be comboed with the yellow spur gear. Then comboed with the, whatever they call that, tan colored one. There's 4.1 to 1 and 4.2 to 1. We can assume, yeah, there's one more tooth on there. And then in the lower range, we have the 5 to 1 with its green. We did not test this because I was pretty sure it wasn't going to produce anything. However, our data shows that, okay, the gear it came with was the 4.2 to 1, the red. And that was close to the best time, but actually the 4.1 to 1, the black, turned out to be the slightly better one. 4.2 to 4.1, very small difference. However, we did put more drag on it. So perhaps the drag lowered the motor below its target RPM range, changing the gear ratio, moved it slightly back closer to its target RPM range. That's possible. Either way, the black gear's in there now. Times still suck. We're at 20.78. What we want to do is upgrade the motor. You can't have a Formula One car without a Formula One engine, no matter how good the brakes are or anything else, right? You gotta have the whole package. We've proven that. So we're gonna start with rev tuned. And then we're going to go through atomic tuned and torque tuned, get some data on that. I predict the car should handle very well. It's going to be very comfortable. Then we're going to move up to Light Dash, see how that works. That could be challenging. But yeah, that's the next round of testing. The time has come to add another item to the parts bill. A big one, relatively. 860 yen for the FMA chassis setting gear. What you get in there is every single ratio, including the ones we all explored. The one that I found was fastest is not the one it came with. So if we're going to continue, honestly, obviously you must have gotten the gear from somewhere. So let's say this is the set. This also gives us a fluorine coated gear shaft, a ball bearing, and a hollow propeller shaft. We're not going to put those in right now though. We're just going to add them to the heap of junk we're accumulating. We'll install them later. Right now we're trying to do some course adjustment on exactly what motor we want. So we needed a gear for that. And next comes the motor. Okay, so the next motor is going in. Rev tuned. We can be fairly certain that this is not going to be the fastest one, but whatever. Sometimes it's very nice to be working on an FMA. Oops. Running or not a backwards person. Goes in there so easy. Okay, to the track. This is the track at the moment, a total of 64.2 meters. A fast car does this in 16 or something. It goes this way, through the lane changer, up a slope, over a dragon back, down a slope. This is a bank, wavies, high speed section, The most fun part, I think, is when you go over this way, you really, the speed that you start to build up as you come off the bank, and then have a fairly uninterrupted run, and then it goes into it looks really quick going through there. Anyway, that's the track. As you notice, there's not a large amount of sustained straights and stuff, so torque is very important. Also, not only because of the climbing, but because a lot of times when you come off here, you're still bouncing a little bit, and then this is already then starts taxing your torque again, and the motor sometimes gets bogged down a little bit. This is where harder tires really help. Anyway, yeah, that's our track for the moment. And of course, atomic tuned. Need an opinion. Need lots of opinions for this test. Always use black ones, or I suppose metal ones. Purple ones, they're junk. Okay. And now we just have to do a little bit of break-in. We're going to do a similar break-in procedure on all of these. Into the car. Then another first set of batteries and another time. And of course, torque tuned too. Well, curse my stumbling hands. There we go. Okay, so we now have been to the track. We've done testing on multiple motors. The numbers show us, here we are, the gear ratios there, as you can see, with the normal motor, we went with 4.1 to 1. It was so close to 4.2 to 1, but still it was faster in our testing, so we're going to go with it. We realized that probably there's a margin of error between those two that's greater than the difference, but still we went with that. And then we moved up to the faster motors. Now the faster, let's see, we started with we went exactly the right order, I guess. I started with the rev tuned and achieved a 1736. This was way better than anything we've had before, and it was almost perfectly stable the entire time around. I got no problems with the 1736. Then we moved to the atomic tuned, and the atomic tuned was even faster, but not a lot faster. Then we moved to the torque tuned, and all of these are on 4.1 to 1. The torque tune gave us a 16.5. And in truth, the atomic tune and the torque tune were both quite explosive. They didn't stay on the track very well and such. So I had to forcibly run the batteries down, a little bit to kind of slow down just enough to make the track. So, especially with the torque tune. So the torque tune is faster. It also means that if we want to go any faster, we have to have brake. An interesting thing about this is that I don't know if I'll have to check my records. I'm not sure if I've ever been into the 15s. So this car is actually going about as fast as, it's a top tier car in speed alone, in lap time alone. It's a top tier car for me already. But that's because my track is what it is. It doesn't have enough high speed sections. So this car would for sure, the friction would, especially if there are hyperdash speeds, the total friction of these rollers adding up would just suck the speed, so it would never be a contender. But since getting into the 15s on my track is hard, and maybe never been done before, I'm not sure. I don't remember what my records are. I'll have to look them up. Because of that, you kind of wonder how we're going to get this thing to go faster. We need more power, but also more brake. So we can't really jump over the jumps any faster than we already are. So we have to go faster through through things that are not jumps, faster than we already are. But we have a small problem. Reliability. As I mentioned, I purposefully moved this roller down, not just because it looks cooler, it makes the car look lower, but because I figured up here it would have less leverage to bend this screw. Now, when we started building this assembly, we had this roller underneath of there, which would almost definitely keep that part of the screw from bending. And I was sort of hoping on that, you know, because ideally you'd have the stay in the middle of the screw, and that way only that much on that side, you know, it'd be half, there wouldn't be enough leverage. The problem is that with this way up here, repeatedly whacking the walls, it bends the screws. In fact, I had to bend these screws back. I guess that's the good thing about bendy screws, is you can just bend them back, but you're worried about breaking the FRP or something if you do that. So even with just not even a lot of laps, just sort of basic time trials, we bent every screw. I'm pretty sure we bent every screw a little bit, but it seemed to be that the rears were worse. So how can we continue in a non-high grade fashion? How can we reinforce this problem in the least expensive way? And no HG parts, period, no matter what. So, I mean, no carbon fiber. Our options are this. We could move the rollers, because the way we built it, we can move this roller stay up and down however much we want, I guess. Other than be kind of stupid to move it up much more than it is now. We can move that up enough to put this roller underneath of it, which would benefit slightly, because that's going to consume 7 millimeters of the bolt. That's 7 millimeters of bolt that will never get bent. 7 millimeters less leverage up here. Maybe that would be nice. Kind of don't really want to do that, but we could, because we want to put mass dampers on there eventually. They may end up on here, and if they do, that means the minimum height of the mass damper is going to be raised. Plus, this looks cool. So the other option is better screws. Let's see what we have here. Let's see. Got some. This looks like maybe a pack of both the kinds that come together in one of those packs. I don't remember what they're called. But yeah, 2 of those. Is that long enough? Oh, I think it is. So we will probably switch to these screws. They're still bendable because they're small, but they are way stronger than these. That might fix our problem. Our other possibility is that we can get a stay or popsicle stick to go between here and here, or here and here, or both. I kind of don't want to do that on the front. Maybe I could box in the back and then use the stronger screws in the front. Maybe that's a good combo. I believe I have some sort of, because it would have to be an FRP popsicle stick. I think I have one of those around somewhere. Maybe we'll do that. We'll box that in, which will make it a lot harder to bend screws. And then hopefully that will fix that problem. And also give us a hanging damper position if we want to use that. And then use the stronger screws up here. Because, you know, I was trying to go with the cheapest parts available, but it's just getting all beat to heck out there. It's barely run at all. And then if it, well, one of these screws, I bent it a little bit putting it together. These are not very strong. The ones that just have the basic head, not very strong. So we don't seem to have any problem with the plate, just the screws. And I do everything I can. I use the widest washers. I always use these super wide washers everywhere I can, because it displaces the weight over more of the plate, which I want to do to save the plate. And then I tightened it there. That's where it's actually tightened. This isn't even doing anything really, except when it's, you know, rocking. And in the rear, whoops, in the rear, yeah, see, it's tightened, isn't tightened until here. But I've got it as tight as I can get it between here and there. And I had the tube as straight as I could. And it's still, I mean, it isn't very strong at all. So we're gonna have to, yeah, we'll probably box that up and shore that up. And then we're gonna get back to trying to make it go faster. Even faster, just no high grade parts. That's the rule. Now, keeping in mind the times we achieve 1651 is not bad for my track. I'm gonna run some of my other faster cars and see what they can do. But 1651 is pretty good. There's a lot of jumping and not a lot of landing, so you really kind of, and there's a hill. It's hard to go faster than 16, you know. But we did it with no foam. We had no foam on this car. So what we can do is add, well, okay, actually, what we need to do first is map the gears out. We need to go back through all the gears again, or at least a couple of them, to see if we can't get more speed out of torqued tuned. And we might do that on the speed checker to save damage to the car, because it's going to fly off if it's going any faster. Or maybe we'll beef it up first. Anyway, yeah. So now the course is clear. Beef up the car a little bit, explore the gear ratios, perhaps add brake. Try no hard gear parts again. So this is going great. I'm going to go now time some of my other cars to see what our progress really is. Okay, so we're back from a speed test. I decided to just run my fastest car right now, Pig Champion, and see what he did compared to Snake Racer. Amazingly, they were within 1/10 of a second of each other. That's all I'm going to say. And it's worth pointing out that probably the cost of the carbon fiber alone on this would buy this car. So, and not to mention the ball bearing rollers, mass dampers, the polycarbonate body to offset the massively heavy mass dampers, the plasma dash, the heat sink, the floating gear, the hollow AO620 ball bearing everywhere. But the problem is it needs so much brake and so much mass damper that its insane speed in the non-jumping parts is just not enough to make up for not slowing down so much. So, especially after a couple of laps, I think that it could get, potentially, it could get like a ringer lap, and I could adjust this. I might be able to remove this, actually. It needs a ton of brake on my track. And of course, you know, better mass damper. A lot of the stuff doesn't make any sense. He's just supposed to be my track boss. He's not supposed to be an actually super fast car. But he has been the fastest car for a long time. So to see something so cheap to get within his sphere is kind of impressive. However, it has to be said, nothing broke on this car. I could run it for 300 laps and nothing would break on this car. Part of him being a Pig Champion is based on the phrase built like a brick and the Three Little Pigs, and how the Three Little Pigs would build a brick shit very well by the end of the book. That's the point of this. Like, it's so strong, it's stupid. How are you ever gonna break that? You know, it's dumb, you know, honestly. Although I would say, up until recently, I was bending this screw. And I put this third piece of carbon fiber back here, or third plate back here, because to stop it from bending that screw. And he's quite indestructible now. Whereas this he ran, like, how long did he run? And he starts bending stuff. So here's the question. Would it pay off to develop this, right? And then just build 3 of them and take them to the race. And as they bend and break down, and just get new ones out. Sort of like how they used to do Formula 1 cars in the 90s, where there was no car, there was merely a bill of parts and a truck full of parts. And you built the car on the occasion of the day, pretty much. Yeah, so that was actually quite enlightening. I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe you can make this... I almost feel like I have to stop and make this guy go faster to stay clear. But, yeah, what we're going to do with this guy, yeah, continue reinforcing him. And then we're going to map out the other gear ratios with the torque tune motor and see where it goes. Will we move to sprint dash? Light dash? I don't know. It bounces a lot. And I don't want to change the tires. And it'd be great to not add mass dampers, so... Let's see where it goes. Okay, so in order to short this car up a little bit, we're going to need this. The 2mm cap screw set, 25mm and 30mm. There they are. I'm not sure what happened to the packaging. I took them out some while ago, I guess. And then the other thing we're going to need is we're going to dig into this, obviously, for the gears we're experimenting with. Obviously, we own all these gears now because we're going to go through the granges again. Also, this, we seem to be having some problems with our prop shaft. I can quite easily prove that it's stripped. It's not that hard to turn, and I'm pretty sure it's the gear on there. So since we've already built for this, we're going to install it, maybe adjust the tightness a little bit, put some CA glue on it to make it a little stronger. We will still at this point avoid using the ball bearing. We'll save that for later, and the fluorine shaft. So there's a slight difference now in the rear. I could not use the FRP popsicle stick because I realized since these are 13mm rollers, it's not wide enough. They only bridge 19s. You need a full stay to get across the whole thing, and I don't have one. I don't want to build one. So what we did is we're using the hard screws on it. I was sort of worried I'm maybe abusing them a bit because they might be better protected in a more boxed in setup. But maybe we don't have to worry about it. I mean, they are much harder than stock. So as you can see, the rollers actually end up at the same exact height, I think. Yes, and the only difference is the stock doesn't stick up as high, which is fine because it didn't do anything. So there you go, before and after. Okay, reinforcements to the rear are complete. I also did, as I said, I replaced the prop shaft because I believe one of these gears was, I don't know if I can recreate it in my hand. But yeah, this one was stripped, it slips. I didn't super glue this one, but maybe I'll do it next time it's out. When I bother to check the depth, I just put it in there to replace it. I did not change these because I figured part of the thing that sucked about these bending is you could tell it was affecting the stability of the car. After a couple of laps, all of a sudden I just couldn't make this one corner anymore, even though you know it was going slower because of the battery depletion. That's because these were being effed up, the car is changing shape. I don't think that matters as much here because the rollers are so close, they're not really moving. It will affect the position of the stabilizer, so maybe it affects it, we'll see. We'll wait till it becomes a problem. So for now, we haven't built any new parts. We changed the gear ratio to 4.2 to 1, and we're going to continue mapping the gears for a while. Okay, so a crazy thing has happened. Continued mapping the various gear ratios and whatnot, and let's see what's in there now. 3.5 to 1, 3.7 to 1. Yeah, it looks like we now have a new track record, and Snake Racer is what gave it to us. It was a 15.98, and let me tell you, that's pretty fast. Pig Racer Pig Champion could go faster if I actually was adjusting him minutely for this track. But for now, technically, this is the fastest car I have. It holds the fastest record. Unfortunately, I don't know if I could even do it again because the car is quite wild and out of control. It continues to bend even the hard screws. And it's very, you never know where it's going to land. It has no brake at this point and no mass damper. So to be perfectly honest, this is a major success. However, we'd like this car to be a little less insane. So we could go two routes. We could increase the braking, or we could add, we could begin to put real braking on there. And it probably wouldn't take much. And that would make it jump a lot better because it would slow down a little bit first, but it would also, the drag sort of straightens the car out if it's a rear brake. So we could go with that. We could also just add mass dampers, because if you think about it, if we just add like 2 back here or something, that might be enough to calm it down. Slow it down a little bit because of the extra weight, and then also manage the bounce a lot better. We're going to try some very small things to keep it on the track. But we're also going to start to get serious about beefing it up. I'm seeing what I can build out of FRP to reinforce the rear here. I got side things, popsicle sticks, some of the less common known parts. Maybe that'll help. We'll figure out something to beat. If we can't get this geometrically consistent from one corner to the next, it can't be a serious car. It's just too chaotic. So we might go back to this idea of raising this plate, putting this screw underneath, and then boxing on the top, just to make it strong. And then either brake or mass dampers, and that's where we're going. This car is really surprising me. Okay, more work complete. In the rear, I have raised the rear stay and then mounted the lower roller underneath of it. This will help a little bit. Also, it'll help the screw not get bent. And on the bottom, this is my normal trick. I tape up. Sometimes I put brake on this element and this element both. So I put tape on here ahead of time so that when I take this off, it's easy to get off. Right now we just have this, the thinnest brake material. I don't know what that is, 1 millimeter, 2 or something. And right now, that's looking like activation of the brake there. Let's see, more like that. So we're just kind of hitting the edge, but we're definitely hitting it, and we're not hitting the underguard section yet. So that's, being that it is the thinnest tape and it's quite high up, it's not a lot of braking. Hopefully a tiny bit of braking and a tiny bit of reinforcement will keep the car on the track, and if it's on the track, therefore it won't get bent as much, hopefully. We're going to see, we're going to try to head back towards remapping the gears again and seeing where that goes. We're going to start with the 3.5 to 1 because that's very fast. Okay, we've done a bunch more testing. We moved from the 1 millimeter thick to the 2 millimeter thick, which may have helped a little bit. The problem we're having is it just isn't stable. It just keeps flying off track all the time. When you get a good lap, it's 16.3. It's pretty good, and then it flies off, and then something gets bent or might get bent. One issue I was having, these are the crap screws. They're right, so the stack up is like, you know, this little brass doodad. Oh, I'm sure there's one here somewhere. Maybe not. So in the collar, there's a little brass collar that this rides on top of. And same thing on the back. If you don't have this screw tight enough, it'll be sloppy. The screw will move around. The roller will play around some more. So you have to have the screw tight. Plus, when a screw is really close to snapping is probably when it's the strongest. So you want it tight. But the problem is then what is happening is the whole stack up is somehow crushing the brass collar or something. And even though this is clearly spinning now, after a while it just stops spinning. And as you can see, I think you can probably see, there's like a flat section right there. Boy, you can hear that going around the track. And I think is there one on this side too? No, that one's okay. But on this one, every time it turns this way, it's so maybe a better design from the beginning would have prevented this. But with these rollers kind of being loud and now having more drain than ever because they're not round anymore, I think it's unfortunately time to ditch them and move to something a little better. We might be able to repurpose them as wide stabilizer discs or something like that. I'm thinking about doing something like that maybe. Cut them down maybe a little bit first. The back is not doing too bad. The setup in the back seems to work okay. But the setup in the front, it's always, every time I look at it, it's bent at a slightly different angle than it was before. And the other thing is, in general, we know that these ball caps aren't really that effective until the car is already quite tipped. So we need something better in the front. How about this? These are not high grade. I gotta tell you, I guess I don't know what high grade is, but either way, we're having no high grade parts. This is a pretty good part. It might be high grade if it's dyed in pink or something, but it's considered a basic but expensive part, 1,100 yen. We don't have too many 4-digit prices. We're going to put these on the front, I think, and we're probably going to use our other set of super hard screws like that. And then let's see how much room is there going to be on top of it. Not much. We'll see, maybe we'll use these. The high mount tube stabilizer set. They go up on top like that. Or that might not make any sense with that, because you already have 2 rollers. Anyway, this should make the car go around the track 3 times in a row in the same way, instead of just bouncing everywhere and being insane, and then pulling out awesome laps and then crashing and breaking something the next time. It has to be a little bit more durable, or we just can't develop it. You know, like it has to be strong enough to run, or we can't make it run faster. This will get rid of our problem that we have, because it sounds like a saw. It will reduce friction in the sense that these are ball bearing, but it'll also have the rubber on there. But the rubber's only on the top, so it looks like if you capsize a little bit, that's when the rubber starts to take hold. Until then, the metal is what's taking hold. Hopefully they'll mount on a standard angle and stay there. This might be all we need. Might be all we need. But I just want the car to not fly off the track. I didn't want to put such an expense. This cost almost as much as the car, this part. But it will make a big difference, and it might be the last part we need, because we can still add lots of brake. We can still add a little bit of mass damper somewhere. Our car's getting close to like 50 bucks now, 60 bucks. Unfortunately, it's a little expensive, but it's still, we're learning a lot, and it is going pretty darn fast, especially for the money. Well, here we are at the point where we have metal rollers. Now, how'd that happen? Well, these are not high-grade metal rollers. They are, sorry, excuse me, 15418 double aluminum rollers with rubber wings, whatever, 13. Very expensive part as far as this, very close to the cost of the car. I wasn't leaping at the chance to install these, because I am trying to keep the cost of the car low, as well as stick strictly to the no high-grade parts rule. Well, there they are. And they are gonna, I would assume, make an absolutely huge difference in the handling of the car. I haven't run it yet. We're gonna try. I use double rollers a lot. I've never had the ones with the rubber rings before. I think that's a perfect thing for this car, though, because let's face it, it needs all the help it can get. Rubber rings mean more down thrust. I used the socket-headed 2mm cap screws, and so that they would be as strong as possible. I debated multiple scenarios for beefing up the FRP to at least double plate thickness, but in the end, I just didn't like any of the things I was looking at, and more cost is always bad. So we got the double rollers. Now we're going to run this again. Before I do, I'm going to mention I run out of spacers that would be suitable for the distance between the end of the screw and this. And usually you want to put some sort of spacer in there, like these ones, because if you put the ball cap on it and you put the spacer on there and you tighten it, it does in fact give you slightly more protection from bending. But I didn't have any. I only have short ones and long ones, and I didn't want to bill for any. So what I did is I took something that I figured it would not be fair to bill me for this. Plastic bushings, axle bushings from any old car. I just used 6 of them and normal wall caps, and it actually has a cool, unique look to it and doesn't violate it. I thought about just taking one ball cap because I had quite a bit of distance. I thought about just screwing it down to a completely bottomed out poke through the top and then put another one on top and have an orange one and a green one. But I think this is even more correct for the theme. Okay, I'm going to time this sucker again and see if it's stable and see what the speed is, how much it's dropped. Because with stability comes speed loss. So we're back from the track. And I don't have particularly good news. I was able to achieve a 15.8 seconds on a 4.2 to 1 gear with these new rollers, and that lap was pretty good. But I have to say, we were having massive issues with consistency. Specifically, well, leaving the track. We're still leaving the track. But where we're leaving the track, I was starting this lane. So the first lap goes into the bridge on the changeover. Then it becomes inside lap. Goes over here, then it becomes outside lap again. So speed's not bad. When it goes over this drag and back, it lands like here, if not here. So when it makes it, it makes it. When it doesn't make it, it's into the dust. It's just not consistent. It's not the same thing every time. And this sort of points, honestly, more towards a rear roller inconsistency problem. Because as this thing comes off this hill, the exact posture of the car when it hits the jump is not the same every time. And that's why it lands in a different spot every time and bounces in a different time. I will say with these rollers, though, that it is clearly faster all the way around the track. I had to run the battery down quite a bit to get the 15.8, and it did barely happen, because it has to be able to do all this once, and then when it gets on its second lap, it's going even faster. If it manages to clear that, I'll break 16 seconds, but it's very bad at that. So, some things we're going to do. Cost is starting to rise now, even though it's less obvious gains. Here's what we're going to do. One thing I've noticed is to fix the rear roller stability, but still not get rid of the plastic junk. There's got to be a way to do it. One issue we're having is that the lower roller was getting a little jammed. I think I might replace the brass things. I think they get crushed a little bit from retightening over and over again. Replace the brass collars. Now, here's something you might not know you can do. If you look at these two rollers, okay, it's wobbling a little bit. Now let's look at this one. I mean, it's not wobbling as much. This compared to this. If you could feel it, you'd really be able to see the difference. So what's different? Well, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can actually put ball bearings in these rollers that debuted on the FMA, and I think they're on that new laser car. Yeah, you can put rollers in there, ball bearings. You got to get the gear bearing set for MS chassis. You get 2 of them in there. They're the same little ones that go in there. What happens is you combine the brass bushing will be on the top, and the ball bearing will be, sorry, on the bottom, and the ball bearing will be on the top. And if you look at these, they're actually all tapered. So if you could get the top to stay the top, it would probably just ride on the edge and be more low friction. So that's a little bit. Let's see if we can see it more from the top. All that wobble. No, this one. It's just not as much. It still wobbles, but definitely not as much. Another thing we were having an issue with is, you know how if you've ever spun something and it didn't have a bearing or whatever, And when you spin it, it spins really fast, and then it reaches a point of resonance and it goes, and just immediately stops. Okay, this was happening with the rollers, and when you spun them, you could barely tell. But when it goes around the corner, you'd hear it go like, whenever it goes around the long corners, and it would be working that roller. It makes that sound. So I'm hoping the bearings will get rid of that. Those unfortunately cost 420 yen, so that's a lot less than, you know, ball bearing aluminum rollers, but it's not very cheap. However, regardless of the cost, it does let us retain our plastic look. And then there's, so I've done that on one of them, I'm going to do it on the other one now. And there's one more thing that we need to try. If we look at this car, see, can you detect, maybe it's hard to show on camera, but this, because the rollers are mounted on the rear brake stay, which I like, there's a problem though, and that is that it bends. It bends when you land on the track and you snag the underguard. It bends every time you go up a hill and rely on the plate. And what actually ends up happening is the entire assembly, including your rollers, is now bending up, and you are getting down thrust in the back, which you don't want. You want down thrust in the front because it pushes the car down in the front. But down thrust in the back is the same thing as up thrust in the front. You don't want down thrust in the back. So, what we're gonna do, I'm not sure exactly, but we're gonna definitely, probably gonna have to rearrange this quite a bit. We might introduce a strut to change the pitch on it, or we might square it up here. That would be the best thing to do. We'll see. But anyway, that needs to be fixed. Perhaps last, because I have other cars that have that issue, and it doesn't seem to affect them at all. So let's try this. We'll finish putting the bearings in, and then since we already built for them, we're gonna mount some mass dampers. Maybe we'll mess around with the location. The mass dampers don't fix our issue or do something interesting, then we'll have to straighten the rear end out. But I'm not so sure we really need to fix it, because like I said, I have a very fast car. I have a Sprint dash powered car that doesn't seem to care. Maybe the issue is that these are plastic rollers and they grip more, and therefore you get more down thrust. I don't know. So yeah, shore up those bearings, install the rear mass dampers. We're only going to use 2. I wish I had the swingy thing. It would be it'd be more than needed, but I like the swingy one. I only have one car with those. I also debated laminating the front plate, but I decided against it. Okay, more work and then more testing. Okay, more work complete. I didn't do a lot of changes because that was sort of the plan all along. You change one thing at a time, therefore you can verify the function and the improvements of everything one at a time. So last time we explained how we reluctantly installed extremely good rollers, and they do make it go faster in the non-jumpy sections, but they did not require, I was hoping this rubber ring would be helpful in stability on jumps, but I guess not. I guess I should have been smarter than that. So what we've done now, because the problem is it pulls great times, but it's very inconsistent. We want it to be less insane, but still get a 16 flat, if not a 15.5. We have, let's see if we can zoom in on that. I think you can see that. Yeah, there's now a roller bearing in there. Still combined with a brass bushing. So it's a brass bushing on the bottom and a roller bearing at the top. And if you look at the roller, it appears to be slightly flared out at the top. So hopefully that'll be only contacting the edge and putting all the load on the ball bearing. Hopefully. We use new brass bushes all the way around. They were getting pretty mushroomed from all the over tightening. New grease, everything's been dipped in the old Zippo fluid. So those bearings are a little pre-broken in now, which is nice. They do spin nice. You won't get them to, you know, you'll never get them to spin, but they're definitely tighter than they were before. We didn't really change anything with the stays, except we did, of course, add the master damper. So we're now ready to hopefully, the ass end was the end that bounced the most, thanks to these chubby tires. This should just make it a little more consistent. This should slow the car down probably by a significant amount, like at least half a second, the extra weight. But at the same time, make it more manageable. It's going to make it a little heavier in the back, meaning it's more of this dragging thing going on. We want the car to be like the front is dragging the back. That's how we want it to be. So, the point of mass dampers, of course, is that you've added total mass to the car, but it is not physically locked to the position of the car. So if you're sitting on the ground, this weight is always pushing on the car. But if you're in midair, it's not always pushing on the car. When you go to bounce, they may be the only thing that bounces. There'll be some usually be this some depth where the car doesn't bounce at all, but the discs do. So yeah, tomorrow morning when everyone's gone, I'll make a lot of noise and test this thing. And my hope is that it will be more stable and do a 16.5. That'd be fine. You know, if it was more stable and did a 16.5, that would be fine. That's not a record, that's not the fastest it's gone. But if we can just make it more stable without doing anything to the gear ratio of the motor, we'd be happy. And then we can get a total tally on all the parts we've blown money on, and see what we have net achieved. Okay, I think we might be there. I think we might be done with this car. I think we're done with this car. The rule is you just can't put Neo Champs in it, and it's great. Or Interlopes, or anything like that. Interlope, whatever you say that. Can't put the really good rechargeables in it. It'll be fine on alkalines and especially cheap rechargeables. So why do I say it's done? Well, as you can see from the times here, this is what you expect from a car that's running well. Those times in a row: 1666, 1635, 1625, 1623, 1686. That's really consistent, especially for a car that has no carbon fiber and only 2 of its 6 rollers are metal. Here's what we had to do though. As I mentioned before, when I added the mass dampers, I only included, you know, half of them, and I put them here. We were still using stock tires, which are just bounce houses, so I put even more on there. I also added way more brake. This is the much stickier red stuff, and I added a thing here which as it angles sets it up for the sticky stuff, and I added this champion piece right here. So inexpensive. Let's see what we got here. The mass dampers we already had installed, and let's see, here we are. Don't ever forget about this part. Front under guard. You don't have to have it orange. It's a limited edition. It's orange. Regular one is gray or something. Looks like that. It's 3 pieces. When you get it, you actually get 2 of them. This is the lower height one, basically for smaller tires. So really, for 360 yen, you can divide that in half, really. But we're going to build the whole thing, of course, because one does not buy spare parts, one buys new parts. So, looking at the action on this, as you can see, clearance in the front little strips of tape. I've been taping things. Okay, clearance at the front is, I mean, let's see here, less than 3.5. Yeah, less than 3.5. So that thing's riding real low, as you can see. But it's just PLM, it's not grippy at all. So as much as it does kind of slow the car down, but it almost stabilizes it more. Kind of like when you're driving a real car in a racetrack. Sometimes you hit the brakes not to slow down at all, but just to stop the car from getting squirrely. There's a track that I go to, Groton in Michigan, and they have like a dip. And when you go for the dip, obviously the car gets light and it's a little crazy. But right after the dip is a braking downhill sort of turn. So you have to go through the dip, but right after the dip, you just have to tap the brakes enough so that the car is, you know, it's like holding onto a cat by its tail. It can only go in one direction. Drags on it a little bit to straighten it. And the back, you can see I put this, not only that, this foam is, look at that, quite a bit of foam activation. It takes a while to get there, but once it's there, it's really there. And this car also had one more change. I put the black gear in it. The 4.2 to 1. Right? Isn't that what it is? If I can't remember, how could anyone else? I don't know why I can remember all these things, but I can never remember the gear ratios. Yeah. So we were at 4.2 to 1 red, 4.1 to 1. For whatever reason, we should be going faster, but maybe it's how it handled. Maybe it's how just torque is distributed around the course, up every hill and down every hill. Maybe it's about the overrun. I don't know. But that really calmed it down a little bit. All these things help slightly. And like I said, on full Neo Champs, it still flies off the track. But I did say that I'd be happy with a 14 or 16.5 in a stable car. I think that's basically where we're at. I would sort of, and I might do this, I think I will. I think I'll pierce the axles and use HD axles because the wheels did fall off once. And I don't like it when the wheels fall off. Yeah, I'd pick up pieces. Anyway, I think we're done. This has been No HG Build Snake Racer FMA torque tuned on this track, which is relatively technical, not as much as others, but relatively. Most challenging points are flying off here after the drag and back, flying off here after climbing this slope. And I struggled with those for the whole thing, and I think we're finally there. We have somewhat, it's risky, but you're never going to win unless your car is at least 5% likely to just fly the hell off the track. You have to, otherwise you're just going to go fast. And yeah, that's it. It's been a lot of fun. So what did we learn from our experiments with this car? What were we trying to do? I guess we were trying to go torque tune speed with as few modifications as possible and still have a stable car. We had a very hard time with it. It turns out overbuilding your car makes it easier to tune your car. Underbuilding it makes it wobbly and inconsistent and difficult to adjust. So in the future, I think I'm going to use a little bit more brains. Not necessarily brains, because this was an experiment, but I'm going to be a little bit more... If I know where a car is going to go, and I sometimes do, like if I know it's going to be fast, I'm just going to start overbuilding it from the beginning, because it's just too much of a pain in the neck to fix everything that breaks. However, you'll never know how strong things are unless you start building things to the minimum. I have some opinions about these plastic rollers. I mean, they're not that bad. Although you do end up paying $2.50 a piece for them because you have to put a ball bearing in there. These ones, the typical ones, there's a lot of drag on them, but I think turning that drag into traction is basically the best thing we could do with those rollers. These are kind of maybe overkill. I could have just put huge mass dampers on it and stuck with the crap ones, but I wanted it to, have confidence. So in the future, I think I would do it, well, like I was planning to do with this car. I haven't got around to it yet. This car is somewhat built up, right? It has a lot, it's amazingly symmetrical because it's an MA, and it has 2 mass dampers in the front, 2 in the back, both at extreme ends. It's heavy as heck because of this awesome body that it has. I gotta tell you, everyone loves this car. It's just so cool. But this was an experiment I started and haven't finished yet, which is where I was going to jack up the motor incrementally, and then as it needed more brake, remove more brake, and just see how big of a motor I could get away with. And in this one, as you can see, I've already put on colossal brake. That's an AR rear brake in the front and an FRP one in the back. They're taped off, so they don't really work yet. But clearly, we're gonna, be aiming for torque tuned again. MAs are completely different beasts. They have a naturally higher top speed, so this is going to be an interesting project. But that's how I would do it in the future. Start with an overbuilt platform that's too slow, with the idea of knowing basically where I want to be in the end. Because doing this how like a kid with no money does it, where you just buy another part every week, you end up going in circles and all that. But this was more than that, though. This was data mining. We really learned a lot about a couple of things. First of all, good brake is probably more important than anything when it comes to surviving hills. Because after all, if you slow down enough, it won't be a jump, right? So we started off with weak brake, no mass dampers, and had a bullet. But that was pretty cool. We got our best times out of that, 15 something. But in the end, it wasn't until I got into the 16.4s where it was pretty stable. So really what you should do is take the torque tuned out of this and put the rev in there. Put the rev tune or the atomic tune in there. That way you could use full strength batteries, because as it is, you have to run down the Neochamps or use an inferior battery. But yeah, I'm very happy with this car. Way to go with Tamiya with all your overpriced stuff. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm going to show you what this car cost Japanese street, adding up all the parts. Now, you never pay exactly Japanese street. If you're on the Japanese street, you probably pay like 10% less or 15% less because those stores are competing with each other. If you're in the United States, you pay triple, quadruple, octuple. Trying to get this piece for anything like 240 yen, which is roughly $2.15. Trying to get, for anything like, it's going to cost you 12 bucks, it's almost impossible to not get that for like $10. So you have to be very strategic. Ways of doing this, knowing a guy is great, because mini four-wheel drive is lightweight, very lightweight. You can stick the parts in letter envelopes, you know, basically. And so you can ship it like a ton of parts at once for very little money. Another way of doing it, other than knowing a guy, go to Hong Kong, go to Japan, go to the Philippines, go someplace in the Pacific Island with a huge mini four-wheel drive community. Go to the store, buy a bunch of everything, stick it in a box, ship the box for $100, and have mini four-wheel drive shit for 5 years. You could do that. Or another way of doing it is going to certain retailers who specialize in exporting out of Japan, who have systems in place where you can buy things, pre-order things, back order things, and everything, and then wait until they've all arrived and ship them all at once, and that saves you a ton of money in mini four-wheel drive. I'm not going to name anybody, but well, I'm going to name them. What the heck? It's Hobby Link Japan. Yeah, if you go to Hobby Link Japan, you will be able to ship a ton of stuff in a box, not necessarily at the exact same time, but eventually at the exact same time. You know, you can buy it a bunch of different times and ship it all at once. You get 10% off, I think, still, don't you, on everything there. So that's one of the closest ways. You're still going to pay a lot of money for parts, but this is more of an experiment to say, like, if we could reduce the shipping costs, does it make sense to build parts out of cars out of low-end stuff? And I think it does. For one thing, these FRP plates are significantly cheaper than the carbon fiber, and they do flex a little, and they will break a little easier, but they're not that delicate, not compared to everything else on the car. Furthermore, you could just buy two and stack them, have a 3mm FRP sandwich, and that would be really strong. You don't necessarily need to have zero drag ball bearing rollers of hand turned aluminum on every single corner. Sometimes, you know, you only need them like in the front. It really helped having that precision in the front, but in the back, it's just, you know, you're just dragging behind. As long as they don't move around, you don't really need zero friction, you know, etc. And we learned that this part is worth twice its price, which is good, because as an American, you're going to pay 8 times its price.